Thank you. Thanks. So just over a year ago, I was standing in a room like this in front of 1,000 people when I had set out to do a little event of 30. The event sold out in a week over Christmas, and we came together to have a very important conversation. The conversation was about advancing women in technology. The energy in the room that night was so palpable you could feel it. And I'm so proud that half of the room was women. We sort of found all the women in tech from all over the place that surfaced at this event. The elephant in the room is that there are not enough female leaders in the tech and innovation ecosystem. Approximately 3 out of 100 leaders are female. At the time, there was lots of incredible women I had sort of met through the journey, but there wasn't an ecosystem movement talking about how do we advance leaders in the economy of tomorrow. There really wasn't anyone doing too much about it, and if they were incredible initiatives, but marching in so many different directions and not unified. Let me take you back to how it all began, that I was standing there in the first place. I spent many years as a lawyer doing leadership development for a while, and then I was very lucky to have the opportunity to become the CEO of a nonprofit in the tech space. And that organization was all about helping leaders of tech companies be their best selves, as leaders scaling their businesses, and as peers helping one another be more successful. I went to my first event. 130 of the 200 members were in the room. I got up, brand new CEO, to share my vision for the organization's future. I looked around the room, and I only saw 3 people that looked like me. There were 3 women in the room, and all of them were white. And I just said out loud, okay, and diversity's on our agenda too. I hadn't asked my board, but I think they were okay with it in the end. I wasn't sure if this was an anomaly. Maybe I was naive. I had spent many years in the legal profession working with incredible female leaders. So I was really surprised. But as I started to go to more events, I realized it wasn't an anomaly. And then I was so lucky to have what I call a move the dial moment. A friend of mine who works at a venture capitalist called a woman who was organizing a trip to Israel with Mayor Tory, with 59 other tech leaders, to learn about the Israeli ecosystem, because they're very strong and many lessons to learn. I hadn't earned my spot as a tech leader. I was a pretty new tech leader, and he said, trust me, take her. She'll do something with this. So based on his relationship capital, I got to go. And what I learned when I was in Israel is that this is actually a global problem. It's not just a Canada problem. The other thing that was amazing that happened in Israel is I heard 2 incredible entrepreneurs speak with a company called iAngels. They happened to be women. I went up to them after feeling a little exuberant because I was connecting the dots, and I said, hey, you said in your speech you're going to come to North America to raise $100 million for your fund. Why don't you stop in Toronto? I'll put some money in the room. I don't have that many friends in tech. I've been in it for about 5 minutes. But I think I can find like 30 friends. And I'll do my best, and let's do an event about you guys and the Israel ecosystem. I'll make the mayor happy. And about women. We'll feature some other awesome women that happen to be, founders that happen to be women. And they looked at me and said, you don't even know us. Why would you even do this for us? And I said, I just want to move the dial for you. And that's how Move the Dial was born. And between then and now, this conversation has gotten a lot louder. You know, as between what's been happening in Hollywood and the brave and courageous women that have stood forward and up as part of Me Too, this conversation is squarely on the global map. As we started to grow, actually, the day after the event, I put an op-ed in the paper. I had not set out to build a global movement advancing women. And I'm actually very passionate about inclusion of every single form. I always have been. But I'm particularly passionate about advancing women leaders of the future right now because I have a 9-year-old daughter. She loves to code. And I'd love her to be able to see what she can become and have gender not even be part of the conversation when it's time for her to make her career choice. So, a baseline report that's been called landmark, actually in the US as well as Canada, 6 events, 40 advisors, thousands of people later, a huge event in San Francisco next Monday with a network I didn't have 6 months ago, a global summit in the fall. Move the dial is a glowing concern. I quit my day job at the tech organization, which was amazing, but this was calling me. Move the Dial is about building a global movement to advance women in technology. But I've been thinking a lot about diversity and what it really means as I've now become a leader in this space. And I'm going to convince you tonight that in order to reap the benefits of the diversity of thought on your team, in any team, large, tiny, you have to create a culture of belonging. And that empathy is really the only gateway to that. Why should we even care about building diverse teams? The moral obligation is clear. We're in 2018. So number one, we're really living in an era where inequality of opportunity is just not acceptable anymore, full stop. Second of all, we produce better outcomes when we have diversity of thought at the leadership and design table. This has been proven, and we really can't afford, particularly in Canada, when we think about the future of our economy, to leave half of our talent on the sidelines. And even more interesting to me these days, as we read more and more about artificial intelligence and deep machine learning and teaching cars how to drive themselves, is that if we don't take the bias out and, more importantly, put diversity of thought into how we design these solutions, the solutions will not reflect the population nor serve the needs of our entire population. So what do I mean by building a culture of belonging? It has been said that diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. But belonging is dancing like nobody's watching. And I fundamentally believe that. So these are some of the statistics from our report, and it's just very clear that this is something that is not acceptable in this day and age. So diversity is about uniqueness, different traits, different perspectives, the quality or state of having different ideas. Inclusion is about being actively engaged in the conversation. So take this example. We have a boardroom table. There are people of different ethnic backgrounds at the table. There are people that identify as different genders at the table. That's a diverse boardroom table. Is it inclusive? I think that really depends on whether we ask the people at the table what their perspective is. And if we ask them what their perspective is, do they really feel that they belong? I think we have to go a step further. Belonging is very much about what Tanya just talked about. Showing up as your authentic self in full form and feeling welcome and wanted and valued at that table. And so Pat Waters, a great D&I thinker who was the chief of people at LinkedIn, does a lot of writing about belonging and speaking. I'm very inspired by her work. And she talks about when you feel that you belong, you are in your superpower. You're able to function and deliver as your highest and best self. And you feel like you can show up as you are, not as you think you should be. Does anybody know what that feels like? Yeah, me too now, finally. Only took me 17 years. But now that I'm living my superpower and my joy every day as my fully authentic self, I know what that feels like. And it's pretty remarkable. So how do companies create cultures of belonging? I think it really starts with a mindset and a very true commitment. We hear a lot of companies and a lot of people talking about diversity because they think they should. But you think you can really tell the difference when companies and individual leaders are truly committed. That commitment forms part of the ethos and the key strategic priorities of that company, and that person not only believes and talks about diversity, they walk it. So that commitment is really at the top, the middle, from the side, and living and breathing inside of the company, even if they don't have the answers. And then what I think it takes is radical action. I'm not talking about little tactics and one or two affinity groups and maybe a policy or a little bit of bias training. Those are all very important things, and I'm not for a moment undermining them. They're all necessary. But what takes it one step further is when a leader walks the walk. So a leader I've really come to admire is a man by the name of Mark Benioff. He's the CEO of Salesforce, and he is truly a rock star. He went home one infamous weekend, and he took a printout of all of the comp of his entire team, big company. And he took a red pen, and he looked for where there were gaps on the basis of gender. And he fixed it. He just said, we're doing this. And people were like, really? And that happened in 2014. He's done another course correct since they made acquisitions, and they've spent over $6 million. They mean business. And I admire that action, and I believe that it takes that level of commitment and willingness to walk the walk to actually make the level of dramatic change that we must to change those numbers, because everything in the future is going to be tech. So what happens if we don't? And once we have those two, mindset and radical action, last, but what I think is most important, is to build a culture of empathy. And what do I mean by empathy? I mean the ability to really understand through putting yourself to the best of your ability into the shoes of another human. Who are you? Being present, really showing up, listening and hearing, putting away the phones, and making the other person that you're interacting with feel that they belong. Empathy was once seen as something soft, but there's actually incredible research coming out of Harvard that is researchers have created an empathy quotient. And they have measured the top most successful companies as companies who have built empathy and empathy tactics into their corporate DNA with their customers, with their employees, and in their social media. And that those companies are dramatically outperforming companies that are not building empathy in as a core strategic priority. I find this fascinating, but not surprising. And so it really does take empathy and human connections one-to-one to make people feel that they belong. And now that we're in this incredibly powerful moment where the world has stood up and said, no more bro culture, no more silent acceptance of Me Too moments, it's time for us to do something about that. And now that time's up, what we need to do is work together and move the dial. We take some big actions together, and we take small steps individually. We listen next time we have coffee with a colleague. We go out of our way to create an opportunity to change someone's life, as my entire life was transformed when I was lucky enough to get to go to Israel with the mayor. We connect on a human-to-human basis, and those little steps and those big ones that we take together to build empathy as a bridge to creating cultures of belonging will entirely transform our future. Thank you.